So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Bob Binney. Bob Binney, along with his wife, Suzette, owns and operates Blue Ridge Honey Company in Lakemont, Georgia. He operates 2,000 colonies along with a sizable honey packing operation. Voted Beekeeper of the Year by the Georgia Beekeepers Association in 2003, Bob has been involved in commercial beekeeping for nearly 4 decades. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the evening with Bob as we chat with Bob about Northern Georgia beekeeping, all its opportunities and challenges along the way. So with that, I'd like to ask Bob if you could unmute your mic. We're going to just take this really casually. We're not having a presentation or any sort. We figured Bob's extremely busy, so we thought we'd invite him up here and just have a casual conversation between beekeepers up north and beekeepers down south in Georgia. And anybody who has any questions or comments, just feel free to raise your hand and just participate in the conversation. So Bob, I'd like to hand you over the floor right now. If you could provide us just a little bit of an introduction to yourself and explain your company and everything around that.
Okay, well, thank you. This is really fun to be with you all. You guys are in a different world. I watch what's going on there with great interest. I spent a little bit of time in Alaska, so I relate with cold weather. I'm just really glad I'm not part of it anymore. I really like living in North Georgia. It's quite pleasant. I'm a little surprised at how many people are showing up to this thing. I see 79 on the number there. That's neat. As Ian mentioned, I've been involved in beekeeping for a long time. I went to work for a commercial beekeeper in Oregon in 1981, and he ran 2,200 colonies, and he did the pollination circuit on the West Coast. We'd start in California pollinating almonds and then go up to back home around our own area and pollinate pears in Southern Oregon. Then we pollinate apples in Western and Eastern Washington, and then on to North Dakota, where we produce honey. And I worked for him for 3 years, and it was a tremendous education. It's really kind of what catapulted me into being a commercial beekeeper myself. So I learned a lot real fast, trial by fire, I like to say. Ian, you asked me not long ago if I was still pollinating almonds, and I don't do that anymore. I pretty much stay close to home these days. My traveling days are behind me. Somebody once asked me how many miles I'd put on with the bees, and it's really hard to estimate, but it's going to sound like a shocker, but I think I might have put it down 2 million miles with the bees. It may sound like an exaggeration, but I think it's actually true. The first year I worked for that fella in Oregon, I personally put 65,000 miles on his semi-truck and worked for him as a full-time beekeeper too. And that was 40 years ago. So I guess, do the math. Now these days, all my beehives are within 40 minutes of home. We have a 40-minute radius around us. We're in an interesting area. We live right at the southern end of the Appalachian Mountains, and the yards that are south of me are on what's called the Piedmont area of Georgia. Piedmont, if you look at the definition, it means rolling forested plain, which is what much of Georgia is. And then in the southern Appalachians, we get the mountains, and then my yards north of me, of course, are higher elevations. And it's really works to my benefit because we can start working our southern yards first and work our way north. And it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for the differences in the season. So it's not like all my bees are popping on the same day. So it's really a blessing to be able to have bees at lower elevations and higher elevations and kind of follow the season north. And then in the fall, we do just the opposite. We start in the north first and work our way south because fall comes earlier in the north and at the higher elevations. The Appalachians are very old mountains. It's very different than what I experienced in Alaska and Oregon too. And the old Appalachian charm is still here. You can still find it. And it's really a nice place to keep bees. The farmers and the country people here really appreciate the idea of having somebody keep bees in the area. I'm the only large commercial beekeeper in this county and the county north of me. And the people may not know me by name, but they know who the bee guy is. So that's kind of fun. I'm watching your introduction here, listening to everybody talk. Your bee club doesn't sound like a hobbyist club to me. It sounds like y'all are in this in a pretty serious way. In my area, there's a huge population of hobbyist beekeepers and not very many commercial beekeepers. When you run into the big outfits in Georgia, you're talking about South Georgia. You get down on what we call the coastal plain, the lower elevations. That's where I don't know if you all have heard of the plant called gallberry, but it's the most prolific and most dependable honey flow in the state of Georgia. And that's all way south of here, real close to the southern border and at a much lower elevation. The elevations down in that area are probably just 100 feet or 200 feet. It's a completely different world. It's almost a different planet. I used to take bees down there for the winter to get a head start, but like I said earlier, I'm just burned out on traveling. I could care less if I ever see a motel again. Wearing trucks out, wearing wives out, wearing ourselves out. I've had quite enough of it, to be real honest. So it's been kind of fun over the years. You know, we pull into a town and the people really know us in some of these areas. And, you know, oh, the beekeepers are back in town, and the businesses look forward to that because we spend a lot of money, broke down trucks and motels and restaurants and all of that. And in North Dakota, they didn't know us by name, but we were the beekeepers. We were back in town, and it made everybody happy. So it's probably a little different than how things go in your neighborhood there. It sounds like you all kind of stay put, which is a good thing in my view.
There's a lot of beekeepers that stay pretty stationary, I guess you could say. It's like, for me, I'm moving, I don't know, 20 miles, 30 miles at the most. We're not migratory, but there's a bunch of beekeepers in Manitoba who do move their hives out to BC into the mountain ranges for winter, just to kind of, you know, take the edge off winter, maybe go pollinate some blueberries and such. Whereabouts would you say is your year right now, Bob, in regards to colony development? Like up here, we're stuck in winter yet. Like we got a ways to go yet. Whereabouts is your season at right now?
Well, my most southern location is going to be in our first real pollen flow in about a week to 10 days. That comes off of the maple trees. We have a lot of varieties of maple, and they're our first real pollen source, which kicks everything into high gear. If we don't get a lot of nectar from the maples in a really good year, we might gain 10 or 15 pounds of weight. But that pollen flow, that's the kicker. Yeah. I'd much rather have a pollen flow than a nectar flow this time of year, because I can provide the carbohydrates, but it's, as you know, it's a lot tougher to provide high quality protein. And that's where those maple trees have a good high quality protein. So that's the big kicker for us.
Do you have most of your hives down there, or just a
Oh no, I only have maybe 6 or 7 yards down into that most southern area. And I put them there on purpose to give us something to start splitting early. We have queens. Our first queens are going to arrive here on March 9th or 10th, and that's when our splitting will begin. I actually do something was going to sound a little odd, but it really works well for me. I have 2 good friends down in North Florida, and I send them queens to graft from so I can get my own stock back. And one of them even takes one of my bee yards, so I'm providing him drone stock too. And that's the way I'm able to hold on to my own genetics and get queens much earlier than I can raise them here. Here I'd be, oh gosh, it'd be, to do a good job, I'd be at least a month later than that.
Okay, you're getting your queens from Florida then?
Well, the early ones. Then when we get into May, we'll start grafting and making our own. But for the last half of March and on in through April, we'll be getting those queens from those 2 friends of mine. They're highly migratory beekeepers also. Both of them are from Wisconsin, and they go to Florida to overwinter and raise queens. One of them is a commercial queen producer. He raises about 15,000 a year, and he's just superb. He's one of the best producers I know. And he really pays attention to the small details. He lets the queens lay a while before he harvests them and sells them. I'm just about to put a YouTube video out on that subject matter. I don't know about Canada, but in the US, I really firmly believe that the majority of the queen producers are doing the the buyers a great disservice by harvesting their queens too soon, starting them too early. I could go down the list honestly, but that's the two big things. They're putting these queen mating nukes on a 2-week cycle, and I think that's just a horrible mistake.
Yeah, I watched lots of your videos, or one particular about raising queens. So I'm just kind of curious, why do you buy those early queens in March and not hold off until you said you start making queens in May? Why do you buy those early ones in?
Well, the peak of the demand for nukes and packages and all that is
Oh,
really
I
in
see.
April, because around Atlanta and North Georgia, their spring is popping in the second week of April. And that's when honey flows begin. In our area, our first major honey flow in those southern locations starts about the 20th or the 25th of April. At my shop and north of my shop, it's more into May. But we have to, if we're going to try to sell nukes, we need to meet that demand in April, and that's why we start producing nukes in March. I like to have the nukes on the ground for at least a month before I sell them, so I can make a judgment on the queen. I don't just put a queen in and see a few eggs and sell it. I want to see some sealed brood. I want to know what she's doing.
Yeah. So in right off the hop, then you're going right into package production and nuke production. How many packages would you make up from your operation right off the start?
Well, oddly enough, I'm starting to downsize. We've made as many as 1,500 packages and 1,500 nukes in a year. And I guess I'll just tell you one of my secrets here. I'm getting old, Ian. I'm not like you. I'm
Tell us all
almost
your
70
secrets,
years
Bob.
old now. So we ran 2,000 colonies last year, and I believe this year we're probably going to peak out at about 1,200, maybe 1,300. Jesse, my main guy, and I were analyzing that today. We're down to about 700 colonies. You might have saw some of those videos where I was selling bees. We sold around 1,000 colonies last fall, which we do every year. I'm also a proponent of not only cycling frames, but cycling equipment by keeping boxes and lids and pallets around for 5 to 8 years and then turning them over and selling them. And, we're constantly making new equipment, just like somebody who'd be making nukes is constantly cycling their frames out. We're cycling everything out. So this year, we're not going to build 1,000 colonies back. We're going to probably build about a 600 back, maybe end up at 1,300. That's where we'll be next summer. I didn't really answer your question. The packages and nukes we'll sell this year will probably total under 1,000.
Oh yeah. So what do you prefer selling? The nukes, like this package business kind of really interests me because you're taking just the bulk of the bees, shaking them into a package and sending them off with the queen. It seems a lot simpler than selling nukes themselves because they're not as fragile to me, it seems, right?
Well, not only is it simpler, but it's also more profitable. But I like making nukes because I'm a proponent of keeping your comb fairly fresh, 8 years or less, 10 years for sure, if you can. And when I make nukes, I am automatically doing that. I don't throw any, well, I shouldn't say I don't throw any combs away, but it's very rare when we have to throw something away because of age, because we're constantly making nukes. So that's the attraction of nukes to me. And just to be quite honest, I just like doing it. I like making bees more than I do shaking packages. So although packages are probably more profitable, I do what I want to do.
Yeah, there was a time quite a while ago before my time. There's quite a few packages come from Georgia up into Canada. Actually, my neighbor here, Daryl Mullen, his father, he used to bring bees up and they used to load their truck down and they went somewhere in Georgia. I'm not sure where they went, but they picked up packages and drove straight back up here. So there used to be a lot of bees from your country come up this way.
Yeah, I have a good friend. His name is Fred Rossman. He just retired. He was a second generation beekeeper. His dad started Rossman apiaries in Moultrie, Georgia. And I'm going to try to get a chance to interview him. He has a very interesting story. They built their outfit on shipping bees to the northern United States and Canada. And then in the 80s, when the border shut down, they got hurt real bad, and they barely survived that situation. And I really want to interview him and have him tell his story as to how that affected him and how he was able to turn the tables and survive, because it really hurt a lot of southern beekeepers when the borders got closed. I just heard somebody mention Australian packages. Y'all bring Australian bees into your country?
Yeah, they come in from New Zealand. They come in from Australia. Yeah, so we get the bees from those two sources. Yeah, we do.
That's interesting. Are they good bees? Are you happy with them?
I'll leave that for everybody else to comment on, but you know, they're a source of bees.
Source of
queens,
bees, yeah.
Yeah, there are queens that come from the other side of the world. So you know, there's a lot of differences between the two countries, but I imagine that'd be the same too from, you know, American stock compared to localized Canadian stock too. We buy a lot of California queens, a lot of Hawaii queens. That's what comes in here pretty much. Yeah.
This is your pilot speaking.
Oh, go ahead, Brad.
We have a question from chat, if I can break in.
Absolutely.
How strong do you make your nukes, Bob, and able to keep them for a month? Do they not get too strong?
No, the magic time is 5 weeks. And let me explain how we make them. We use 2 frames of brood. We use 1 frame of open brood, and we use 1 frame of sealed brood. And if we can find a sealed brood that looks like it's about to hatch or in the process of hatching, we'll choose that. And of course, we take the bees that are on those frames, a frame of food, honey and pollen with the bees on it, and then a shake or 2, depending on what the weather's like and whether the nuke's going to stay in the same yard or not. And when that nuke is ready to bust and pop out of that 5-frame box is really when the bees begin to hatch from the queen that we're introducing. And you know, you're looking at 3.5 weeks. At that date, we need to look at things real seriously about how long we can hold on. It's, as you know, it's tricky. I want to have a well-populated nuke. There's a fine line between a perfect nuke and a nuke full of swarm cells, and it's only a few days. So we try to have as good a nuke as we can without giving the customer something that they're going to end up with trouble with unless they know what they're doing. A lot of our nukes are sold to newer beekeepers, and you know, sometimes they have swarming, they want to blame us, and we try to tell them this nuke needs to get transferred tomorrow, not 2 weeks from now. And sometimes they run into trouble real quick if they don't get that thing in a bigger box right away.
I just notice, Bill, you have your hand up. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, Bob, do you keep these nooks in a wooden box? We use jesters when we sell them. So do you keep them in a wooden box, or do you sell them in a jester or a cardboard box? We do.
Okay, I think I understand the question. We do something very odd. And I used to make all my nukes into wooden nuke boxes and spread them out and grow them till it was time to sell them or harvest them or whatever. We're starting to do a lot of nukes over a double screen board in a single story box. That's so much more forgiving. You know, the earlier question was, you know, really aimed at, you know, how long can we go before we have swarming problems? And if we have it in a deep box over a double screen board, not only do they grow faster, but they're more forgiving. They can grow bigger in case we're running a week late. They're not full of swarm cells before we harvest them. We literally find the queen and harvest that nuke and put it in a jester nuke box. And the beautiful thing about that also is if we can grow that nuke a little bit beyond 5 frames, excuse me, we can actually choose the frames we want, and that helps us make the perfect nuke. A lot of times those nukes will be 6 or 7 frames of bees by the time we harvest them. So that's another trick we have up our sleeve. I love double screen boards. I don't know what took me so long to get around to using them. I think they're an underrated piece of equipment in this country anyway. I don't know, you're so different up there. I don't know how they'd work for you guys because your season goes so fast as compared to ours. You're condensed, your hours change so rapidly and everything grows so rapidly. I don't know how well they'd work for you, but boy, they sure work for me great. And then sometimes we'll even, we'll pull 5 frames out of that deep box and we'll restart it right on the spot with the frame or 2 that's left behind. And part of your question is we do use the jester nuke boxes. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're more durable. They take the weather better, and we're happy with them.
I started using the double screen boards below my Nukes. I do them both on top of a really good solid single or a double, and they work well here as well.
Yeah.
Bob, could you talk a little bit about that double screen board? I know you have a few videos on your YouTube channel about that, and I just find it really interesting. Just maybe talk a little bit around why you use them and how you use them, and just how you leverage that, just the ability they provide you.
Well, there's really several benefits, several reasons we like using them. We do prefer either making a nuke in the same yard or moving it to a yard that's very close. I actually try to lose the field force on purpose because our queen acceptance is so much better when you can do that. And when you put a nuke over a double screen board, you don't need quite as many bees to keep it warm and help it grow fast, because you got all that heat coming up from below. I would think in your neighborhood early on, that would be a huge plus. So we lose the field force, keep it in the same yard, but it's in good shape anyway, because the heat's coming up from above. And if we do cells, it's kind of tricky on those 4-way pallets. We try to get an entrance facing in all 4 directions. So every other double screen board is actually facing backwards, so the bees can come out beside the pallet on the side instead of the fronts. Ian, this is a very curious thing to me. I don't know if you've ever mated a lot of queens up over a double screen board or something, but I actually have much better mating when I am not down at the pallet level. Down on the ground at the pallet level, I have maybe a 60 to 65%. Now we're talking about 10-year average, year in, year out, good years, bad years. I might average 60 or 65% mating on those pallets, but I just raise it up 1 box on a double screen board and it goes up to 70, 80, 85%. I don't know they can even be facing the same direction. I don't know the answer to that, but it does make a huge difference. And then the other thing, if I run across, I like running double deeps. I know my videos show a lot of singles, but that's just because we've been in the middle of that over the last year or two, trying to split doubles and sell the equipment. I like running double deeps, and we keep several of those double screen boards on the truck. If I run across a double deep colony that is swarmed on me, I just make sure the top's got to sell, the bottom's got to sell, little brood in both halves, and we slip that board in. I know you all know, new beekeepers don't quite understand that just because there's a queen cell in there doesn't mean there's a guarantee that that thing's going to get queen right. Maybe 75, 78%, I don't know, maybe 80 in a good year. Well, when you slip that double screen board and you have 2 halves trying to mate at the same time, I don't know what the math is, but you have a lot better odds of coming up with at least 1 half of that thing being queen right. And if one is queen right and the other's not, we just pull the board out, splash a little syrup around them and let them go back together. And of course, if they both mate, you know what that means. We got another colony. So I like the benefit of that too. I love them. We just use them all the time. I saw you had put a video out on how to build up a weak colony with an excluder and a newspaper. Our technique for that is just to put a weak colony over a double screen board, and 3 or 4 weeks later, it's a whole different kind of colony. So there's a lot of uses for those things.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do a little bit of experimenting on that. The screen board you're talking about, how much surface area, how much open screen would there be within that board?
Well, it doesn't take a lot. I actually get asked this question more often than you would expect. People want to know how big those holes are in our screen board. And the ones you would buy from the factory or a bee catalog would be 100% screen or close to it. We just use the same hole saw that we cut holes in our lids for a 70 millimeter lid, like for a feeder jar. And we put 2 of those holes side by side and put an 1/8 inch screen on the top and the bottom. And that provides plenty of heat. You don't actually need the full screen to get the benefits of that heat coming up through there. It's really interesting. I know all of you experienced this, especially in Canada. Sometimes you pop the lid and you can just feel the heat with your hand before you even touch a frame. Well, with a double screen board, that's all rising. It's all rising up through that double screen. So it doesn't take a total 100% screen 10, 25% of screen really does it.
Yeah. Brad will
So
just,
that was,
there we go.
Bob, that was my question, actually. I actually built a few double screen boards just 2 days ago to use in my wintering building. And my question for you really was just that. How did you come upon your surface area for that screen? I believe you've answered that. But a follow-up question for me would be, have you noticed the dynamic of the colony on the bottom? Are you concerned with them not being able to retain, or maybe, I mean, obviously the ventilation is then increased in that colony. So what's the dynamic that you're concerned about on the bottom colony?
Well, that's a good question. I try to avoid putting a double screen over a colony that is a little bit on the small side. Of course, Georgia's way more forgiving than Canada. I have a lot of nukes overwintering over a double screen board right now, and some of the colonies are only 5 or 6 or 7 frames. That would be considered a tiny colony, I suppose, in your area, but for our area, that 6 frames of bees is creating enough heat to benefit the top and still be okay. It's not too terribly unlike providing a big ventilation hole. I mean, if you put ventilation there, they're going to lose some heat anyway. So I just got to make sure the colony's big enough. That's all.
I have to ask, we hear a lot about small hive beetle. We don't have small hive beetle up here in Canada to the
You are
most
so
part.
lucky.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you talk. And how do you, like, if you're making a smaller unit, you're talking about making a smaller unit, but providing it in a bigger space, like in a single box over top on a screen board. How are you managing your small hive beetle issue, or is there an issue there at all?
Well, we're lucky enough in the mountains here that we're kind of out of the really heavy danger zone. The worst area in Georgia is on that southern coastal plain area. It's just terrible down there. And then the Piedmont, which is kind of the middle ground, now they can have a lot of trouble too, and they have to be careful. But where we're at, we're just a little bit out of it. We can have trouble. We have them. You know, at any given time, you can open a colony and see 2 or 10 or 12. But as long as that colony is queen right, that's the big #1 issue. If a colony goes queenless, it's just like you just put a open for business sign out for the hive beetles. They just jump on it. You got to have a queen right colony, and even a small nuke, if it's just 3 or 4 frames, if it's queen right, it can take care of itself.
And at least another question about providing supplemental feeding, like with patties and such like that. Do you have any type of strategy, or do you use patties in your operation?
I do. On those 6 southern yards I mentioned, they all got patties early. I don't do it to my whole outfit because I don't need my whole outfit peaking early. Those southern bees all got they got 2 rounds actually, and I use a Man Lake product called Ultra Bee, and they got their first round, gosh, I guess it was about a month ago, and they got their second round about 10 days ago. And it just gives, and you commented on one of my videos, I think you agreed with me that pollen patties really are not really great at stimulating brood rearing, but if the bees are inclined to rear brood, they allow them to do it. And so once we get past our winter solstice, so to speak, the bees begin to become a little bit inclined to rear brood. And one thing that surprised me this year, although I went into winter with a lot of pollen in the combs, in January there was none. Those bees consumed that pollen over winter, so they really needed that pollen patty in order to rear brood. And they've done it. We checked in on them about a week and a half ago, and the medium-sized colonies have 2 or 3 frames of brood in them. So they're starting to turn over that older population. And by the time we start splitting those earliest yards, we're not going to have massive populations, but we will have young bees. So we'll murder those colonies. We'll split the dickens out of them and just leave them with maybe 1 or 2 frames of brood and take the rest and make splits. Part of that strategy is that I don't want to go back there again for a month. I have so much work ahead of me that the earliest colonies will get split to pieces so that I don't have to worry about swarming. We might give them a 2-gallon bucket of thicker syrup and just wish them well. Just say, we'll see you in a month. Good luck.
So would you say your colonies ever, excuse me, would they ever go broodless throughout the winter period?
Yes, we do. Oddly enough, if we don't have a brand new queen, they'll go broodless about the first or second week in November. And then they'll actually start rearing just a very little bit of brood before Christmas. And then by the 1st of July, you start to see these pretty good softball sized brood patterns. And of course, you know the difference between carniolan bees and Italians. If we got Italians, we'll have maybe 2 frames of brood going into January, whereas the carniolans might just have, that little softball size thing going on.
Yeah, so that leads another question. What type of bee are you looking after down there? My impression is that a lot of southern beekeepers would be after that Italian broody type bee, but sounds like you have some carniolan stock in there too then.
I have a lot. Not too long ago, I had mostly Italian because we were going to California pollinating. If you're going to pollinate almonds, you have to have a pretty good colony on the 1st of February. You have to be averaging 8 frames of bees or you don't get paid.
Yeah.
And it's hard to make carniolans do that. And now I'm not doing that sort of stuff. So I'm happy with that smaller cluster going into winter. And as you know, they go through a lot less food stores. They overwinter sometimes with an alarmingly small cluster, 4 or 5 frames of bees, and you look at them and you wonder if they're going to make it through. But for somehow magically they're swarming right on time with the Italians. So they come along. I'm not sure about this. I wish somebody would do a study. I think the carniolan bees are capable of keeping more brood warm than an Italian colony. That has to be their trick for growing so fast. You can look at them and say, well, I'm not sure they're going to make it through winter, and then go back a month later and they're full of swarm cells.
Yeah, I noticed, Ted, you had your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I was just wondering about your treatment regimen in Georgia. Spring treatments, what do you use? Do you late, early, and then fall treatments? I'd be interested to know what you're using.
Well, my treatments are evolving every single year. I do something different. We had trouble with apivar this last fall, and I've never done anything to cause wholesale resistance to amitraz. And it's not just me experiencing it. Even brand new beekeepers that have just had bees 1 or 2 years are having trouble with apivar. And I've never undertreated. I mean, I would put 3 strips in a single to make sure they were getting treated right. So that's not the problem. So we would normally use amitraz around the 1st of August in the form of apivar. And then in December, when the bees are first part of December, when the bees are broodless, we give them a back-to-back oxalic acid vaporization treatment. And I'll get off subject for just a moment. I've gotten a lot of information on oxalic acid coming up out of the University of Georgia and Auburn University in Alabama. They're doing studies on oxalic, and I hope to post a video with a lot of information about that pretty soon. We've been under treating. People don't realize this. Down here, we're told over and over by the so-called authorities that you can treat 1 gram per box every 7 days, 3 times in a row, and you've taken care of your mites. Well, I don't know about y'all up there, but down here, that's absolutely incorrect. And we have a little retail store here. And I cannot tell you how many beekeepers come in here and say they lost their bees. And of course, my first question is, what did you do for mites? And they did this regimen of 3 oxalic acids 7 days apart in August when their bees were loaded with brood. And it just simply doesn't work. But this guy, I forget his last name. His first name is Ramesh. He's in Oregon, University of Oregon. And he's found out something very simple. We're underdosing them. You don't want to use 1 gram per box. You want to use 2 grams per box. And if you do that, you'll have a lot better results. And then at UGA, they did a study where they were treating every 5 days, and they did it 5 times in a row. And at the end of the study, they had just as many mites as they did when they started. It was obviously having an effect because they didn't grow the mite numbers, but they didn't lose any mites. And they were using what is considered the typical dose of 1 gram per box. And my opinion is it's just simply an underdose. I think we need to do 2 grams per box. And also, if you do the math on the mite hatching situation, Mites begin entering cells again around 4 days after they've hatched. So if you're waiting 5 or 6 or 7 days, you've already lost some mites. So it just doesn't add up. The math doesn't add at all when you're doing that. So I think we need to take another look. Now, I know in Canada, you go broodless for a long time, but here in Georgia, it's a little trickier trying to work around that brood period versus the broodless period. And I love oxalic acid. We just got to get a handle on how to use it right.
For ourselves, we actually use multiple oxalic acids later in the season, much later in the season. November, we've even done it into December, into the broodless period on a really warm, sunny day when the cluster breaks.
Yeah.
And had a really good effect from it. Will Clark also made a good suggestion. He goes along and gives them a little tap before he gives it oxalic vaporization, just to help break the cluster up a little bit, loosen it up. That's our biggest problem is when the treatment time is best, it's a little cool, and we have to make sure we're getting that treatment throughout all the bees. I agree 100% on the amount of oxalic. We actually do much more than 1 gram per hive, and have seen good results from it.
Well, you said the magic word, broodless. That's the magic word. That's our tricky part. Now, down in South Georgia, they don't have it. If you go down into Florida, they don't have any broodless period. Never. I had a fella asking me what to do from Fort Myers. He never got less than 2 frames of brood all winter long. And it's kind of hard to do oxalic acid when it's like that.
I have a question from
Bob,
chat.
there's a question in chat. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Brad.
What kind of oxalic acid? Applicator are you using, Bob?
Okay, well, traditionally we've been using what's called I think it's called Provap 110. Ian has one. I've seen him using it in a video, and we have 4 of them, and we have a nice little generator on the truck, and 4 guys go to a yard with 4 of those things, and we can get through 96 colonies in about 45 minutes with that situation. This year I purchased what's called a VM vaporizer out of California, and it is faster. You can do more colonies with just 2 people, but man, that thing is a tricky little machine. They say you can run it with 1 person, and you can, but we found it works a lot better with 2. One man runs it, and the other man keeps cleaning it and feeding it. It's a monster, somebody's got to take care of the machine while the other guy is using it. And if you can get a handle on that, it is indeed much faster. And we're happy with it, but they kind of cuss about it. But, when I do the math and I look at the clock, I can tell they're doing a lot more hives. So I just tell them we're going to stick with the VM vaporizer for now. Just don't want to hear about it.
We have 2 of those, and it took a good couple of years to get onto it as far as letting it run properly. We've actually found putting more material in it.
Oh, really?
Not just a little bit of dosing actually worked better. But my son and my hired man do most of it, so I'm not the one that should speak about it. They've got all sorts of little tricks of the trade that they do. They won't even let me run the thing. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I'd love to have a conversation with them to see. I know there's a lot we're missing here because it's our first year. I have something interesting. I don't know if my camera is going to show it up. Show this thing. It is a piece of bicycle brake cable. Okay. If you're using a Provap 110, this thing is really good at keeping that little tube clean. You put it on a drill, you put it in there, and it just reams that tube right out. I know a lot of people have trouble with those, getting those tubes blocked up. That's our trick on those. And on the VM vaporizer, I think it's a piece of 3/16 or 1/4 inch cable. We try to stay away from taking that motor off. Boy, that's a pain in the butt. I don't know what year model you got, but the newer ones have a clamped on electric leaf blower motor, which works great. But when you have to clear it out, you got to take that motor off. So they give you a little ramrod for cleaning it out. And what we've taken to doing is using a piece of cable and going right through the tube or right through the area where you would feed it, where you would put in the product, and trying to run the cable down there. And that helps a little. I know that we got a lot more to learn about it. It really is it's a weird machine, but it does work.
Do we have any questions out there, Brad?
Not in chat currently.
Okay, can I ask you a question? Ian?
Shoot. Yeah, sure.
Now,
Hey, I'm supposed to be interviewing you here.
well, I know, but this might help everybody. And I think I've heard several people mention this. Y'all are using Saskatraz bees. What do you think of those bees?
Yeah, I've been using Saskatraz. Maybe other people here tonight can maybe comment on them too. I've been buying directly from Albert Robertson up in northern Saskatchewan, and I've also been buying the queens that they've been breeding down in with Ray Oliveira's. And I find the earlier stuff with Albert a little bit different than what Ray is doing down below. But I find like I'm not talking about mite tolerance or anything like this, because I'm treating my bees and I'm not leaving them untreated to be able to tell whether or not they're handling the mites or not. But I find them very easy to work with. They go into winter with great big calm clusters. I mean, you tip back the colony and you just this big cluster of bees are hanging there, and they're easier in their feet. I don't know what else we want as beekeepers. So I do breed from them, but yeah, I'm happy with them. Do you buy them down there?
No, I never have. I keep hearing about them. Am I correct in assuming that they're maybe a hybrid of Carniolan and Italian somehow?
Yeah, I'd have to ask a reference from somebody here on just exactly, maybe Merv would be able to say on what kind of lineage you're following, but it is a true survivorship project.
Yeah.
So they go in and then nothing comes out but the survivors. So it's quite an interesting program.
Well, I guess you probably need pretty big clusters to get through the winter up there. Down here, a good healthy 5 frames of bees will make it. And I kind of like it that way. They use about half as much feed, honestly. That's very attractive, especially if you're trying to overwinter on honey, which we do. Some of our bees, all the videos I put out on feeding, you wouldn't think so, but sourwood is actually an excellent overwintering feed. It doesn't crystallize. It has a relatively low mineral content, and it's not like I'm trying to leave sourwood is valuable honey, y'all. It's worth a lot of money, so we don't try to leave boxes of it on purpose. But you know, the brood nest backfills with it as at the end of the honey flow, and so a lot of our bees have a lot of honey on through the winter. And the Carniolans just go so much farther on so much less. So that's very attractive to me.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much that we have monster beehives like clusters and that, but you know, all the basics are all the same. If you have a good queen in there that's vigorous, you control the mites and you provide them good winter feed. I mean, you're going to have those colonies coming through consistently, right? So those are 3 basics. I assume that you follow the same. Go ahead, Brad.
Bob, I have a question in chat.
Okay.
Do you find that higher levels of oxalic acid treatment to have a residual effect for a longer treatment period?
That might be the answer. I asked Jennifer Berry that. She's the one doing all these studies at the University of Georgia. And, you know, and maybe you folks can steer me in a different direction, but as far as I know, they're not real sure what the mechanism is for oxalic acid handling those mites. That's the theory, the residual. Yeah, I see the guy doing this. But it's a bit of a theory still. No, I'm not sure that anybody's actually proved that yet. But that theory would go along with the idea of a higher dosage leaving a longer or greater residual amount. I know, you know, used to do the dribble method, and I learned eventually that the dribble method with oxalic is kind of hard on the bees. So I know that's a little different subject, but that kind of has to do with the oxalic, you know, being in the brood nest for some time. I don't know how that plays into that theory. I know I'm not supposed to be asking you the questions, but does anybody up there use the dribble method with the oxalic acid? I guess not. You don't want to, trust me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead, Will.
I used to do trickling every fall.
Uh-huh.
for many years. I don't anymore. Now I only vaporize.
Yeah.
And I did find very much so. I sometimes hurt my bees.
Yeah.
Trickling in the fall was the best, but putting cold liquid on a colony when it's only 5 degrees outside, it would bring the temperature down. If there was any brood, you would find damaged brood. So I personally wouldn't do it again. And about vaporizing, like I use one built in Manitoba here. It's kind of like, I think the one you're talking about, but I would say that it's better because it keeps the temperature higher. But I probably use at least 3 grams per colony,
Ah,
a single, and I would say even upwards to 4. I smoke them with intense, thick smoke for 10 to 12 seconds.
yeah. I've not heard of or seen any evidence that these higher dosages, when you're doing the vaporization, hurts them at all. I think people were kind of afraid of it for a long time, but I've got a couple of friends that do what you do. I was aghast at what I saw them doing, how much smoke was going in there, and they just shrugged and said they'd never seen any issue with it. So
I've
I
actually
think,
hit some like 5 or 6 times, and I did them like 20, 30 seconds,
yeah,
overwintered them, no problem.
yeah.
Seemed to hurt them at all.
Well, you know, Jennifer, I keep mentioning Jennifer Berry. She's a pretty good friend of mine. I know her pretty well, and she's been to Italy, and she says the Italians are actually going to the trouble of catching their queens around the 1st of August and putting them in a cage, and then 15 or 16 days later going ahead and doing the oxalic vaporization, and they say it works great. Of course, that's a lot of work finding a queen and caging it, but that's what they're trying to do in order to stay organic and to stay away from using chemicals and use oxalic acid. I can't imagine doing that to 1,000 colonies, but if you got maybe 100, that's practical. I don't know.
So to follow up with Ted's question about your treatment regime, so you're treating with Apivar, and then you proceed with in the fall into winter with oxalic. Are you following up with an Apivar again right away, or you're not getting away with just 2 treatments, eh?
Some I have in the past, but I never really finished that answer. Thank you. I think my treatment next fall and possibly in the spring is going to be Apiguard, which is a thymol product. I used Apiguard a lot in the past, and quite honestly, I'm not sure why I got away from it, because it did work for me. It's a little tricky in Georgia. It would work much better for you because you have cooler weather in August, and down here it can still be real hot in August, and we'll give them half doses, and we'll give them maybe 3 doses or 3 intervals instead of 2, and give them a half dose, and pull the timing a little closer together. And it does work. And thymol, I'm absolutely convinced, is highly antiseptic too. If you've got a little bit of icky brood issues going on, that thymol will help clean it up. I know fellas that are, I don't know if you have any American foul brood up there at all. I haven't seen it in 3 decades, but I've heard of other people having it and giving them a thymol treatment and it having some effect with it. I don't have any personal experience with it, but I've heard of it. It definitely works on European foul brood. I know that. I've seen that myself.
I think.
Go ahead, Brad. We have John has his hand up. John Russell.
I think he's muted. Oh, there he goes.
Hear me now?
Yes. Hi, John.
You're there now, John.
No, thank you very much. Just curious if you have any experience or you've ever incorporated the use of formic acid into your operation at all.
I have. I used it 3 or 4 times, and I had a good experience 1 out of those times. It's back to the same problem. It's heat. If it's 90 or 95 degrees outside, it's pretty tricky. Now, it probably would work. You guys would do much better with it there because I don't know, what are your temperatures in early or mid-August? I know it can't be 90 or 95.
It can be.
Oh,
Yeah,
can it
we're
really?
blessed with the
Not
cold, and
as a rule, but
it gets pretty hot too. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the first time I used it, I killed a bunch of queens, burnt a bunch of grass out in front of the colony, and turned 10 frame colonies into 4 frames real fast. So then I got this idea that, okay, I'll just give them a half a dose. And the next year I gave them one, I don't know what you call those square things, gave them one, and it worked beautifully. I really had a good experience. And then the next year I did the same thing and had a terrible experience because nobody told me or nobody told anybody else that they had lowered the dose of formic in those things. And I didn't have a good enough effect. And I didn't realize it. I just assumed it was working. Big mistake. You know, I tell beekeepers, don't assume anything when you're doing mite treatments. You need to check. I just assumed it was working. And a month later, I could see brood issues developing and did a mite roll. And I was shocked at what I found. It hadn't worked very well at all. And then I did it one more time, and I've come to not really like it. Maybe I need to try it again and give it a second or a fifth chance, you know, but my experiences haven't been great. I know a lot of guys that are, you know, out of Colorado are saying they like it. So, you know, maybe I just didn't give it enough chance and try to, you know, figure it out good enough. It might be a good thing that I need to look at again. I'm not sure.
Can I say something?
Sure.
We've my dad and us, well, through the years, he's used a lot of formic acid. He's usually used like a hard flash with the bottom boards trace underneath, and he's had really good results. But same thing, temperature is very critical. Want to stay below 25 degrees Celsius probably, and humidity is just as important as temperature. If it's humid, it'll hit them way harder and it'll beat the heck out of them. And as well, really, really specific in like adjusting the dosage to the cluster size. If it's a smaller cluster, you better cut that dose like in half, or else it'll fry it out pretty good. But I mean, some of my dad's cleanest years was when he was doing multiple rounds of flash treatments with formic. In the spring, he was even hitting them going into the honey flow, and then even again multiple times in the fall. And it's probably some of the cleanest years that he's had. And yeah, and as well, I'm trying to do with us slow release pads now. I'm experimenting with and trying to figure out how I feel about those and how good of a effect it's having.
Well, let me tell you something about a friend of mine in Idaho who uses it during a honey flow. He uses it multiple times. Well, let me say he used to use it multiple times during a honey flow, because the last time he did, he found out that it gave the honey an odd taste. Something happens now. Maybe it has to do with the type of honey or humidity or who knows what. Idaho can be very dry, very low humidity in the summertime. And he found his honey was getting kind of a weird taste from multiple uses of formic during the honey flow.
Okay. Yeah, we never experienced that. But
Yeah.
another thing, to avoid hot temperatures if you want, or if you're doing a flash, I guess if you're doing slow release, it's different. But we'd like to do it at the end of the day, so we'd avoid the peak heat of the day. It was always kind of a nice way to do it.
Yeah, well, we have a problem as it gets dark, the humidity goes through the roof. Last summer, I would say 8 out of 10 days, I woke up to 90 to 100% humidity, and it's extreme here. We in our area, this is going to shock a few of you. We have an extreme amount of rain in my county. We're the second or third wettest county in the U.S. or in the continental U.S. Last year we got 104 inches. The year before was 91. The year before was 124. And it's wet a lot, and humidity is really, really an issue for us. I'm guessing that Manitoba probably gets a little bit dry in the summer. I don't know.
Lately.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Humidity is our worst enemy when it comes to keeping our honey dry too. Now we're getting on an entirely different subject, but I buy a lot of honey. We go through a lot of honey. We packed about 1.5 million pounds last year. There's no way I produce all that honey, and we buy many semi loads. And I have to be very careful buying honey out of areas that are south of me because the moisture is a tremendous problem. And I honestly, I kind of have a trick. I watch the local weather in the areas where I'm purchasing honey. If I see rain and high humidity, I want to sample first. I want to see that honey before I buy it. I'm getting so tired of getting honey at 19%. And the states that are north of me, I don't have that problem. I buy a lot of honey out of Wisconsin and South Dakota, North Dakota, Michigan. I don't have that issue, but in South Georgia and Florida, every other year, I'm getting a terrible problem with moisture. So what I'll do is I'll try to save. If I get my hands on some real thick honey, I'll put it aside and save it for a rainy day when I end up getting some thin honey so I can blend it together. I'm guessing you guys don't have much of a moisture problem up there, but down here, it's something we really got to pay attention to.
Yeah, I'd say it gets humid up here too. And if beekeepers get a little bit too quick, there can be some high moisture honey pulled off too. But you get into middle of the summer going into August and we're pulling off 15.5% canola honey, and we got to get out of the comb pretty fast. So
yeah, I love that.
It just depends on the year, right?
Well, my view is that that's a higher quality product. If you can take a honey that's 18 or 18.5% moisture and pull it on down to, below 16, I think you not only have thicker honey, I think you have better tasting honey. It has more character. I just think you've created a better product. That's my view.
Before we shift gears, does anybody, sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I just looked that up. I just quickly Googled that, Bob, and the source that I found stated Manitoba, southern Manitoba anyway, annual rainfall at about 20 inches.
I'm sorry.
So yeah,
I'm sorry.
Quite dry. Yeah, actually, the southern Manitoba contains one of the driest deserts in Canada.
Ian, can I add something here about oxalic acid?
Yes, go ahead, Medat.
Yep. Thanks for allowing me to join you guys today. It's great. Just a couple of things here about oxalic acid. I've been working in that project for about 15, 20 years. As you know, I was part of the registration of this product here. I'm also working with Jennifer down there and Jeff Williams about this product in Alabama and Georgia. Two things. For the liquid acid, if you want to apply it and get proper results, you have to split the dose between the top box and bottom box. If you have double and you apply the oxalic acid, the liquid from the top, you're going to get about 40 to 60% kill. However, and that's in broodless time, if you split the dose between the top and bottom, you get about 90 to 95%. Because again, the acid in the sugar syrup will not travel too much to cover the bees population to kill the mites. That's for the liquid. We went actually, because again, the liquid is hard in Canada, especially if you're our fall treatment, we went with the sublimation. With the sublimation, yes, oxalic acid will not hurt the bees all the way up to 2 or 3 grams. What we are finding, that's why I asked early on about what kind of applicator you are using. The applicators right now, which we are using, it have a lots of different degrees of temperature, especially that VM applicators. If your temperature, it goes in your applicator above 195 Celsius, or what do you call it, about 380 Fahrenheit, basically the oxalic acid will break down. That's why you have to keep increasing the dose to have the effective dose to kill the mites. That's why I hear today some guys going with 3, 4, 5 grams, 4 or 5 times, and that's hopefully you can hit to the level it can kill the mites. So right now I'm trying to work in some ways how to relate the temperature of your applicator to the proper dose so you can get the expected results for mite kill. That's why we hear all of this different story, and everybody say you have to, master how to do it. But mastering how to do it, you are trying to standardize it in a system we don't know how much decomposed during the application itself. So that's something, this is a tricky part about oxalic acid sublimation. However, it's excellent potential product to help the industry, but we have to standardize it. I like the guys who are using ProVap. You are one of them, Ian, as far as I know, and several other guys too. But they are having good results with that. All what I did, don't go above 195 Celsius. Some guys, they like to put it to 220, 230, and 240 to speed it up. The more you speed it up, you are breaking it down. You are not going to get the proper dose in your hive. So I hope that helps to understand a little bit the mechanics, how this product works, and how do you get the best results out of it.
Okay.
Bob, do you mind if I ask Medhat one question on that?
Well, please.
Yeah, Medhat, so when we're talking about temperatures of the sublimation of the oxalic, and we're looking at our little device, and that's why I like the ProVap, like you say, because you can see exactly what that temperature is. You set that temperature too low, and it just takes for bloody ever for that oxalic to, sublimate, and it plugs up the nozzle and everything. So then we crank it up to the 230, but when we put our dose in, it drops right down to under 200 or so, or 205, whatever. Is that, my question to you would be, is that the temperature of the bowl itself, or is that the temperature of the oxalic inside sublimating? So that the oxalic would be a lot cooler than that temperature reading is telling us. Do you believe that?
Actually, we open up one of those, the ProVap, and you look at the cable itself, like where it is attached to get the temperature. It's just right underneath the cup. Okay. Keep in mind, when early on we did this work, and I worked with some engineers from the university here in NATE and stuff like that, actually 1 gram can be effective dose. However, with the type of applicator we are using, 2 grams will give up what I call it, with the making some leeway for the composition of the product, but still enough to kill the mites. So, but with ProVap, that's one of the things which, like as Bob mentioned and yourself, it keeps plugging, and that's because the tube which is going out is a little bit longer and it's not covered with the heater itself. That's why it gets colder faster. So that's a kind of little bit a problem with the design itself. We've been looking at how to fix this one. But if you go even to 230, 240 with 2 grams, you will get the proper results. But we have some guys really, first of all, they're not putting the 2 grams exactly. They're adding more or less like 2 grams. So it's still getting the results which they want to have. So we have just to be careful. Frankly, with my experience with Alberta beekeepers here, who has this machine from California, after doing it 2-3 times, you have to do it 2-3 times, runs from one side of the yard to the other side. That's to get you the proper application. And that's because too much decomposition happening, and you cannot really get the proper dose. The first of the row, the few hives, they get the proper dose, it gets heating up and blowing inside, it becomes big fog, but very little oxalic acid will be on the base.
Can I ask him a question too?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Have you tried the new, I don't know what they call it, it's the new version of the ProVap where you can stand up and use it? Have you tried that new one?
I did not really, because I wrote to this guy a few times and he knows I am doing lots of research in this area. He never responded back to me, and he said, we tried in our yard, here's the video.
Yeah.
And so it was, as for myself as a researcher, like I try to make sure we are providing the proper information. That's why myself and Jennifer and Jeff Williams, part of the Varroa group in the United States, we talk actually once a month about what our progress. So that's how I try to stay away from that one. As long as you don't have that thermoregulator to measure the temperature under the cup and let you know what's coming out, somehow, how can you control it?
Jennifer has just asked me for 50 colonies to donate to a study on a new applicator for oxalic acid. I don't know if it's
Strips.
are you a part of
Oxalic acid
that?
strips. Oxalic acid strips, yes. They are
Yeah,
getting it from Argentina and they are
yeah.
doing the study together. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, the blessing that I get from being a part of those studies is I get the information before it's published. So
Yes, and that's great.
yeah.
I know exactly. And that's why we like to work with some beekeepers like yourself, because that's real hives.
Yeah.
You know, you manage them in the proper way. And if we kill your bees, you're not gonna let us go back again. So that's how I do a lot of my work.
Oh,
But
good.
I'm glad you help her out in this stuff. And as I said,
It's a pleasure
mine actually to do the same
kind
study here in Canada, actually.
it's a
That's
pleasure
it.
to semi-meet you here. I know your name well. I've seen it many times. It's nice to see you in person, sort of in person.
Thank you. Actually, I asked Ian yesterday and I said, can I join this meeting? And he gave me a visa to and passport to allow me to get in.
Yeah, I told MedHat only Manitoba is allowed. But I said MedHat's an honorarium Manitoban, so you're
There you
welcome.
go. There you go.
Thank you, guys. No, it's great discussion. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I appreciate the input. I'd like to shift gears a little bit, unless there's somebody else who has a question about oxalic or something in that regards.
Just a quick question, Ian. We use one of those laser temperature units on our VM, and it's amazing how much temperature, like you said, Manhat, the temperature can range up dramatically. And we also have a unit that has a much wider opening, and the temperature was better controlled in that one. Just because the flow wasn't as condensed and would heat, this one allowed it to stay a little bit cooler. So we're modifying our VM to have a larger opening in order to be able to maintain the temperature at a more consistent level. But it's a $15 thermometer and goes up to 600 degrees. And you point the laser right where at the end of the probe, and it gives you a very accurate temperature on what it is actually coming out as.
Actually, if I can add one thing here, if you remember the first machine we developed in Alberta here, like Corduet machine, we used only a fan for use for computers. That's how much, and the air velocity and the cold air, it can change that temperature at the end of the pipe. And now with the air blaster coming in, that also another factor, it should be factored in. So all of this kind of stuff is kind of really interesting. I didn't understand it before until I worked with the engineer. So he gave me a lot of information about how to measure that stuff. So it's fun.
So Bob, you talk a lot about University of Georgia. You must do a lot of collaborative work with the university on projects like this.
I have. I've done a lot of studies with them. They're only about an hour and a half from where I live, and my kids all went to college there. See, so that's kind of the Bulldogs. Go Bulldogs, right? So I went to my first Georgia State beekeeping meeting in about 1995, and I met Keith Delaplane. And I met Jamie Ellis back in those years too. And he was just a sophomore in college at that time. I'm actually going to see Jamie on Friday. I'm going to Florida on Friday. I'm going to interview at least 3 people, maybe 4, 3 of them being commercial beekeepers. And then Jamie's allowed me to, we're actually pretty good friends. I shouldn't use the word allowed. He's happy to have me. He's going to show me around the lab and maybe share any of his most recent research they're involved in. And I look forward to seeing what he has to say, and he's looking forward to seeing me too. It might be the same way in Canada, but down here in the States, we have these really good friends, but we don't see them but every 5 years, but we talk on the phone a lot. And for me, Jamie Ellis is one of those people. I might see him every 2 years or something. And then my friend Chris Werner, I'm going to interview him too. And I'm really looking forward to seeing him. He's a top-notch queen producer, and he's got some tricks up his sleeve. When Chris talks, I listen. So I hope I can come up with some good footage on him and get it out here in the next month. And then I'm going to meet another good friend, Ray Latner, who runs the Date Ant Center there in High Springs, Florida. He runs 4,000 queen mating nukes, and I'm not sure how many colonies. He must have a couple thousand to do all that. So that's what I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I was waiting till this was over. My bags are packed, and I'm leaving for Florida in the morning. It'll be a 4 or 5 day trip, and I hope to come back with a bunch of YouTube footage. We'll see.
We'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Brad, do you have a question?
We just have a few in chat that I feel we should clear up here.
Sure.
We have a question from a little while ago. Asked if you see the quote killer bee genetics over there in your area, Bob.
I don't, but I have some friends in Florida who have, and they let's just say their bees are a little fiery. They're not full-blown African bees, but I don't like them. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. That influence is definitely creeping in parts of Florida. Now, the two guys that I have raising queens for me in Florida are isolated. I think the Tampa Bay is where most of the African influence has creeped in, and then a little farther down south. I'm not an expert on African bees, but my understanding is they need some sort of flow most of the year, something coming in. And believe it or not, there are portions of Florida that have nothing for months. And I don't think Africanized bees do well in those situations. So I don't know if they're ever going to be widespread across the whole state or not. South Georgia, they found a couple that they exterminated. I guess it was about 4, maybe 5 years ago. An old fellow was doing some bulldozer work around an old house, and he accidentally hit a post on the porch and literally knocked the roof of the porch down. And there was a beehive in that column, and they came out and killed him. And that got everybody's attention. So all the government people swarmed that area, and they found and they literally did find every feral colony within 50 miles and killed it, whether they thought it was African or not. And since that time, I've not heard of any other incidents. I know of one queen breeder down in the southeastern tip of Georgia that has a reputation for having a little more fiery bees than people like. So maybe he's getting a little bit of influence. I think the state that's really got a problem is Texas. I just love it when some of those queen breeders in Texas say we don't have any Africanized traits. It's very interesting that they're the only county in the whole state that doesn't have Africanized bees. So it's definitely around. But if you look at South America and you go south and you look at the elevation where I live, if I read this correctly, where I'm at, I don't think we're going to have a problem. I think we're high enough in elevation and far enough north to where we're not going to have a problem. If you look at South America and you do the reverse and come north, that same parallel or whatever you call that goes around the earth is just south of Atlanta somewhere. So who knows, maybe I'll be the southern breeding ground someday. I don't know.
Well, thanks for that. Another question we have in chat is wondering about your experience with Nosema cerana and what you do to control it if you have it.
I get this question all the time, and I have no answer because I have never treated for it. I've never seen a problem with it. And I just, I probably got it. Maybe I should get a microscope and check it out. But if it ain't broke, I'm not going to even look how to fix it. So that's my short answer for that.
Well, I personally agree with that theory. Thanks to both, everyone involved, from myself for the conversation on the Provap and the oxalic acid vaporization. That was a huge education for me and very helpful. Thank you. So I'll send it back over to Ian. That was all from chat for now.
Yeah, I'd like to transition a little bit into queen breeding and just your breeding strategies within your operation, Bob. I know you do a lot of breeding within your operation. Can you elaborate a little bit about how you select your breeders and what you're looking for and just those characteristics that you want to promote within your apiary?
Well, the last few years, I've actually been buying artificially inseminated breeder queens from Sue Kobe. For a couple of years there, I was buying carniolan, and then the last 2 years, I've been getting carniolan inseminated with Caucasian. I have some experience with Caucasian bees from my days in Oregon, and then again in the 90s, there was a fellow in Mississippi that raised them and sold them, and for a couple of years, I had his bees. I really, I can't say that enough. I really like Caucasian bees, all the way up to the point of the propolis. Honestly, the propolis can just be a bit much if you get pure Caucasian bees. Of course, there's no such thing as pure anything, I don't guess, but if you get something that has a lot of Caucasian in it, you will have propolis on everything. It will be on your steering wheel, it will be on your radio knobs, and it will be in your wife will make you get a separate washing machine. I mean, that's the way it is. But other than that, I really like Caucasian bees. And although I never intend to have pure Caucasian bees, I'd like to see a heavy influence of them. They're kind of they're really different. If you really get a good strain of them, they're very unusual. They're frugal like carniolans, but they overwinter with bigger clusters. Their clusters are about halfway between a carniolan and a full-blown Italian, but they know when to shut down. They know when the pollen stops, they stop too. And they kind of stay put until the pollen starts again, much like carniolans. And I like that about it. And then their reputation for being very gentle is correct. The Caucasian bees have been more the gentlest bees I've ever had. Of course, a lot of guys have bred these Cordovan Italians to be extremely gentle too, but they're not any more gentle than these good Caucasian bees. Another downside to these darker bees, of course, is finding the queens. My gosh, you can go blind trying to find, dark brown and black queens, and the Caucasians have that going against them. But I'm really kind of shooting for a carniolan Caucasian cross, and I'll never get completely rid of the Italian because I have other beekeepers around me. The smaller guys, they bring in Italians from South Georgia or wherever. So right now, I'm not really picking breeders. I'm paying somebody else to do that work for me. And once I believe that we've made enough of the transition, I'll start picking out of my own outfit too. I've connected with some other guys that are raising or have been getting Caucasian semen from Sioux. There's a fellow in Tennessee and a fellow in South Carolina, and we're going to start swapping virgins. They can artificially inseminate. I can't. And we made deals where I'll take them virgin queens from my breeders I got from Sioux, and they'll take some of the semen they purchased. And among us, we're going to try to do a little work too and try to get a little more Caucasian into our outfits.
So I'm going to ask you another question that's again related to Varroa mites, but do you put any attention towards the grooming behavior or hygienic behavior or any type of mite tolerance behavior within your breeders when you're selecting them?
Well, I do, but in a different way. I don't, like you, I treat for mites. So it's kind of hard to treat for mite resistance, but you can, if you go into a yard of 30 colonies and you do a mite roll on every single colony, and 9 out of 10 of them are rolling 5s and 10s and 15s, and you got one that's got a 0 or a 1, that's a no-brainer. There's your breeder right there. And you can approach it like that. And I have in the past. That I don't know if that's scientific or not. Now, for a while, I actually ran some no treatment yards, literally no treatment, just let them go. And I had those 2 yards for 7 years. And in the beginning, I lost a lot of bees, as you might imagine. And eventually it got to the point where they were kind of sustaining themselves. And I might lose a third of them every year. Well, if you don't have to treat, losing a third's palatable, honestly. And what I was doing mostly with those bees was I was letting Jennifer Berry come and pick breeders out of there when she was actually, trying to do a lot of studies on mite resistance. And then another fella that's no longer in business, Dan Purvis, he had kind of a mite resistant line going about 8-10 years ago. And he was getting breeders out of there, and then they would make production queens and I'd get them back. So it's kind of a roundabout way of benefiting from having those no treatment yards. These days, I kind of look for it in the brood, honestly. If you've got mite problems, how do I say this right? I call it snot brood. I know that's an impolite, colorful word, but if your brood is looking a little snotty, that's a sign of mites. I tune into that immediately. the guys that work for me are quite surprised. I'll even see it over their shoulders. Hey, there's a problem in that colony. Just look at the brood, and they'll look again and say, I don't see a problem. And I'll point out one cell. I say, you see that cell right there that's melting down, that snotty brood right there? It may not even test out as European foul brood. It's something else. And a lot of times those are the colonies that have a mite problem at the same time. They kind of go hand in hand, honestly. If I have this saying, I say, no mites, no problem. If you can keep your mites pretty cleared out, you don't see that kind of stuff. So I almost look at the bees themselves to make that judgment. I know that sounds kind of odd, but that's kind of my approach.
Are you putting any attention towards the small hive beetle when you're breeding your queens, whether or not they tolerate or handle the small hive beetle better?
No, because we don't have enough of a problem to make that judgment. I suppose you could do that in southern Georgia. And this small hive beetle is an interesting thing. A little bit different subject, but when I used to take bees down to South Georgia for the winter, I can remember seeing a colony get taken out by small hive beetle and just watch them work their way around the pallet. These were good, strong, healthy colonies full of bees, double deeps. And I could see them take a colony out. And then when they were done with that one, they'd all move over next door on the pallet and take the next one out and just work their way around the pallet. And the bees would still be there, but they'd be kind of eating out of house and home. There'd be no brood or no pollen, and it'd have a weird look about it. And one lesson I learned about beetles is to keep your bees in full sun. And I think also with mites, I think that can't give you a scientific study to back me up, but I think if you keep your bees in the shade, that you'll tend to have a higher mite load also. Just all around, no matter what the temperature, no matter what's going on, I think your bees do better in full sun. So I know I got off the subject of the question there, but I guess the short answer is no, I don't do anything to breed for bees that fight mites. You got to watch me, and if you give me a subject, I'll go down 10 rabbit holes before we get back to the subject matter.
I have nothing wrong with anybody going down rabbit holes as long as it's not me going down that rabbit hole. So after we transition out of spring, we were making packages, nukes, mite treatments and such. When does your flows start down in North Georgia?
In my southern yards, it would be about the middle of April. In my northern yards, it would be early May.
Like right for your honey crop.
Pardon me?
Basically, when do you, I guess what I'm asking is when do you focus on honey crop down in North Georgia?
Late April into May.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And, in the past, I've hammered my bees so heavily for nukes and packages that we kind of missed the first half of the flow. The blessing there is that we had almost no swarming, of course. So as I progress into the future and make less nukes and less packages, I might have to pay more attention to swarming and how to combat it. I love what you do, and I practice what you do in a roundabout way by giving them a box to lay in and then taking it back later. It's all about giving them, room to create brood at just the right time. I'm really, really big on equalization. We'll get everything the same. Even if the same is wrong, we'll try to make everything the same. And that way we can manage everything the same way. That cuts back on labor if you can do that. And I'm really big about timing the peak of the colony so it doesn't peak before the honey flow starts. I try to have it peak just after the flow starts. I'm absolutely convinced that if a colony peaks in population before the major honey flow starts, that your odds of swarming just went up substantially. And I think you will have, if you can have a colony peak 10 days or 2 weeks after the flow starts, I think you'll actually make more honey because you'll have less swarming.
So you're focusing on honey crop in April. How long does that sustain? That takes you right into May,
Well, that spring honey flow for us lasts about 5 or possibly 6 weeks in a good year. And then normally we'll have a dearth of 2 or maybe 3 weeks between the spring flow and the sourwood. We're really blessed with this sourwood thing. I know I'm quite jealous of what I see up in Canada. You folks make incredible crops up there. We can't come anywhere close to that. But The big ticket for us here where I live is sourwood because it's so valuable. It's worth US, it's worth $5 to $6 a pound in the drum, and I can sell semi loads of it if I have it. I never make enough. Never. I've never in all my years. I've never made enough sourwood to meet the demand at those high prices. And a lot of it goes in. We sell a lot of our honey wholesale in the cases, and at that level, we're getting $7 and $8 a pound. And in our retail store, we get at least 10 a pound, depending on the type of container. And I really concentrate a lot on that sourwood. Sometimes I'll even skip trying to make spring honey with some yards, trying to time them just right so they make that sourwood crop. And when we're making nukes and splitting colonies in the spring, I'm often trying to strategize timing and peaking to take advantage of that sourwood flow. The sourwood flow is very tricky because it's the peak of it is only 10 days to 2 weeks. It can last as long as 3 weeks, but that's a rare year. And part of the problem with it is we have a plant called sumac that encroaches into that flow in the spring, and it's a good honey, but it's dark and it's distinctive, so it can change the flavor of the sourwood and the color. And then we have the same problem right after the sourwood. So you might have watched that video on trying to produce, excuse me, sourwood, where I was stripping supers off at the last minute. And excuse me again, if you don't get that sourwood relatively pure, you're missing out on that $5, $6 a pound. So it's really tricky. Beekeepers come up to here, North Georgia, out of Florida and South Georgia, thinking they're going to, hit the pay load, but they don't, because they have a hard time keeping. You almost got to live here to do a good job, just to really watch the plants and time your supers just right. It's hard for people to migrate in here from out of the area and really cash in on that sourwood flow.
Yeah, here we're so focused on the clover, alfalfa, the canola, that pretty much we have such a tight spring, not compared to yours either. You have a lot drawn out spring than us.
Yeah.
We're so focused. We're focused on growing and then producing. We're very staged. How much yield would be coming off sourwood would you figure?
Well, the 10-year average, and that's really how I look at it, because some years are a bust and some years are great. The 10-year average is probably a 5-gallon bucket, which doesn't sound like a lot, but at $5 or $6 a pound, that's not bad. That's $300. So this year we did pretty good. The sourwood ran very late this year. I had a very difficult time keeping the basswood out of it. And normally our sourwood will kick in about the 4th of July, and we had all our supers stripped off and put empty supers on around the 4th of July. And when I went back around the 10th or 11th to check on things, they were all making basswood honey still. So I had to strip the supers off again and put fresh supers on. And that late in the season, I was convinced that I was just not going to make much of a crop at all because it was running so late. And then it just came in like a flood, and we made 2 or 3 supers in just 10 days. And for us, that's a big deal. We make 3 shallows or 3 medium supers in 2 weeks, and, we're going to do a dance. That's what we're going to do. And that's what happened this year. I made a good sourwood crop just in a very short time, when we'd all almost kind of given up on doing it.
We've got a question, John Russell. Go ahead.
Hear that?
I got you now.
Okay. I swear to God, I didn't think I'd live long enough to see the fact that basswood flow was a problem.
Well,
because up here, I would literally give a kidney,
yeah,
not mine, someone else's, for a barrel of basswood right now. So
we're happy to see it. Honestly, it's just basswood comes right before the sourwood, and usually it ends by the 4th of July. So usually it's not a problem. Basswood is great honey, but as you know, it's very distinctive. And if you get a bunch of basswood in your sourwood, you got a problem.
Well, in the end, like up here, again, like as Ian said, clover, canola, alfalfa, there are specialty crops that we hunt for, like sunflower and buckwheat. But one of the glories of being in the geography that you live in is you have sourwood, basswood, and a variety of nectar flows that we don't have access to. So it's hard not to be just a little bit jealous of
Well,
where you are.
I know, but when I look at these videos of Ian, I'm going, I just, I'd swap my honey crop for his. I think I would.
Well, grass is always greener, I guess.
I
Right?
guess, yeah. Our honey's better, but he makes more of it.
It's hard not to admire 6 or 7 deeps of honey on a
No,
hive.
it's not. Now y'all know what the best honey in the world is, don't you? It's your honey.
Mine,
It's mine, yeah.
of course it is. He was
Max
looking at
and
me
those
when he said
brats.
that. Yes, it is.
Bob, I want to talk a little bit about the rest of your business. You have a supply store going on down there. You mentioned you pack 1.5 million pounds of honey. You have a lot going on. I just
Yeah.
watched a video before I come down here where you had a big contract. You had 35,000 containers to fill, and you had the whole place transitioned into this packing plant.
Yeah.
Like, speak a little bit about that other side of your business where you're
Yeah.
like you're the service outlet and you're providing the packed product to your customers.
I saw your comment on that video. You commented clean, 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 and you may not have saw my response yet, but my response was, guess what I ask my employees to do after they say they're done cleaning? I tell them to clean some more. I have this saying, I say, if you touch a drop of honey, if you don't clean it up, it's going to follow you around the rest of the day. So it is very clean in there, and we take pride in that. But one of the reasons it's so pristinely clean is that the public can see everything. We have big plate glass windows where the public can see right into our processing rooms and look into our warehouse. So it behooves us to keep everything really clean. But we're inspected big time, way more than the average beekeeper. We go through 3 different levels of inspection. We have the state of Georgia, the Department of Agriculture, which is the easy one. And then we have the the federal government come in. They're a little tougher, but not too hard. But where we really have to really crunch the books and get things right is we call it a third-party food safety audit. And we have to do that for the big grocery store chains that we sell honey to. One being Walmart. That might be the only one you would have heard of. We sell to Walmart and Kroger's. I don't think there's any Kroger's in Canada, but there's 1,400 of them down here. Kroger's is the 4th biggest grocery chain owner in the world, but they don't always show up under the name Kroger. So we got Walmart, and then we co-pack for several people that sell honey to other grocery chains. This third-party food safety audit, I like to say we need to be able to tell the inspector where the egg was laid, what chicken laid the egg, and who fried it. We have all of these books, traceability. We have to figure out where the honey came from. And all along the process, we've got all these books there's probably 6 different sets of books, one for the product coming into the warehouse, and one for the batches we make, and then one for the batches that go into the pouring room. And then when it gets sold, there's another log, and it just goes on and on and on. And I don't wish that on anybody, but at our level, we're forced to do it.
Yeah.
We, as I mentioned earlier, we buy most of our honey. There's no way we can make that type of honey, and I wouldn't even want to try. I heard one gentleman mention earlier that U.S. is paying around $2 right now. I pay a little more than the going rate. I try to get good honey from good producers, and I try to give them another 10 or 15 cents. I want them to sell to me so I can pick and choose who I buy from, and it's worth it to me. These big, huge packers down here in the States, they'll buy honey from anybody, and they go by color. Sometimes they don't even go by flavor. I could care less what the color is. I want to know what it tastes like, and I want to know how thick it is, and that's my criteria. Our honey goes into a jar, kind of medium amber, in a pint jar. I guess it would be called light amber. I don't even think it's extra light amber. I don't use those color charts at all. I just stick my finger in the drum, and that's my test. If I'm happy with the taste and I'm happy with the thickness, and if the color doesn't look like road tar, I'm good to go. And that's my criteria. And then we blend honey. We blend 31 drums at a time. We have a warming room. And I actually learned about my warming room from a beekeeper in Vermont, where it can get pretty cold too. We heat from the floor. We put the drums in a room that holds 31 drums, and we have 300 feet of hot water pipe in the floor. And that's how I heat that room. And it works really well. We can take, right now in the middle of winter, we can take hard as a rock crystallized honey and put it in that room, and 4 days later it's ready to pump and to use. The room runs about 120 degrees. The honey doesn't get 120 degrees, probably gets about to 110 at the core of the drum, which is good enough. It's cleared off, the crystallization's gone, and then we'll pump it into our big tanks. And right now we're averaging about 50 drums a week. At this moment, we're processing about 50 drums a week. And it goes into all types of containers: honey bears, quarts, pints, everything you can imagine. And this is going to sound very odd, but actually, I'd say 20% of the honey we sell actually goes to other beekeepers. Now, you all know what happens if you're in a place where people learn you've got local honey for sale and you run out real quick. And of course, they're not trying to promote my honey as local honey, but they don't want to lose their customer base. So we get kind of this surge of beekeepers buying from us in February and March before their crop comes in. And that's happening right now. We're selling buckets and drums to other beekeepers. We sell it for $3 a pound. It's been through the decrystallization process. We run it through an 800 micron filter, which is a pretty big hole. We advertise our honey as raw and natural and unpasteurized and all that stuff. And we try to mean what we say. We use that 800 micron filter to get out the big stuff. I don't want any splinters, nails, dead bees, or any of that garbage in there, but I do want it to be raw. Excuse me, the more I talk, the more I'm getting congested. But
so are you packing the varieties then? Like in that video I was watching, you're packing blueberry honey. So are you targeting specific floral types too, and not just a blended product?
If it tastes good and I can call it something, I will buy a label and bottle it as that.
So you have a real relationship with your buyers, or like your producers then, to make sure it's all authentic then.
Absolutely. And I'm quite comfortable with telling them, I'm sorry, this isn't good enough. And they know, I mean, they know. I pay extra for those varieties. If I can call it something, I'll pay another 15 cents a pound, or some things I'll pay quite a lot more. One honey that we sell down here a lot is orange blossom out of Florida. I'll pay an extra 35 cents for good orange blossom. Just bought some buckwheat out of North Dakota. I paid an extra 35 cents for that. Tupelo is very expensive. It's almost as valuable as sourwood, and I'll pay good money for Tupelo out of Florida. Right now, in our retail store, we have, see if I can remember them all, there's about 10. Blueberry, goldenrod, sourwood, 2 varieties of local wildflower, orange blossom, basswood, clover from South Dakota. I know I'm missing 1 or 2. It's hard to remember them all. And we put all of those in our retail store and offer tasters for people. And it's amazing how many people come in and say, my gosh, I had no idea. I thought honey was honey.
Yeah. Jonathan Hofer just said on chat that you're missing out on the canola honey.
Yeah, I heard you say that canola honey is really good. I had to think to myself, it must be a different canola than we have here, because down here it's just mediocre.
We're not going to keep you too much longer, Bob. We're kind of going long in our chat, which I'm really enjoying. That's fine. I wanted to talk a little bit about your supply store too. I noticed that you build boxes and equipment, and how much, I noticed you do it looks like quite the sizable shop that you have going, building boxes. How much equipment do you sell out of your store?
It's not a tremendous amount. We're a Man Lake dealer. If you know, does Man Lake sell in Canada? I don't know.
Bee Made buys from Man Lake to come up here. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm a Man Lake dealer, and we I was just talking to the guy that's in charge of the wholesale accounts just yesterday. And for some reason, we had to look up my February purchases, and he was a little astounded. We probably spent $100,000 with Man Lake in the month of February. It was a lot of money. Of course, some of that's going into our beekeeping outfit too. It's not all sold here. And of course, February is probably the biggest month for purchases because we're preparing for the big rush in March and April when that's the busy season for our bee supplies. And we don't make a lot of equipment. We make migratory lids to sell, divider boards. Those nukes you saw in that video, I don't sell those. Those were for us. I'm selling my older nukes, which are only 5 or 8 years old, at basically the same price it's costing me to make new nukes. So why wouldn't I do that? It's another way of cycling equipment before it gets too old to lose too much of its value. So I'm constantly about this cycling equipment again. We make our own pallets. So we make a lot of stuff, but as far as the most of the woodenware, the frames and the boxes, we purchase all that from Man Lake.
Yeah.
And we get a pretty good pricing out of Daydant too. I like Man Lake's woodenware, but I like Daydant's metalware. I think Daydant makes better extractors and better smokers than Man Lake. Man Lake doesn't make those things. They buy them from Italy or China or something. And I think Daydant's doing a better job in that respect. So we have a pretty good, if you walk in here, you're going to get 9 out of the 10 of the items that you think you want to get. We have a pretty good stock.
Yeah, I think I noticed you had maybe 2 or 3 people staffed in your supply store. Is that right?
Well, we call it the retail store, which includes honey and gifts and bee supplies. And we have 4 full-time girls, but we run 6 days a week and they only work 5. So, I think there's only 2 or 3 days there where they're all 4 here at the same day. But they stay pretty busy. Of course, they do other things. They help us. One of the girls helps us do some of the ordering and some of that kind of stuff. So I tell you what, we are extremely blessed at this moment. All of my employees are just great. I have no complaints about anybody. I can tell you guys this because this won't post until after they get the surprise, but in their paycheck, that envelope that they're getting this Friday, there's a letter to everybody telling them all how great they are and that everybody that works for me is getting $1 an hour raise on that day. So, and they earn it. They're just great employees. I love them all. I couldn't be where I'm at without them. I put in the hard work back in the old days, but for the last 10 years, without all these employees, I would not have what I have now. I like to tell people often ask me, how do you do everything you do? I don't. I mean, I some of this stuff I don't even do well. I rely on other people to do it for me. And I'm really blessed to have good employees. I try to treat them really well. I think that's part of the chemistry. You got to treat your people good if you're going to keep good people. And I'm a firm believer in that. So they're all in for a big surprise on Friday. And Christmas, yeah. I give them great bonuses on Christmas. I treat them good.
Yeah, you and me follow the same philosophy on that. Brad, do you have a question?
There's a question in chat. Have you been working with any of the new products for supplements, Healthy Bees, Spirulina, and Super ADM?
I've not worked with anything hardly because I've not seen a need for it. I have used products like Honeybee Healthy and Pro Health out of Man Lake, the lemongrass type products. But I've never seen a use. I just don't have issues. So maybe I'm looking at it wrong. Maybe I need to look closer and put things under a microscope. Maybe I would benefit from some of these probiotic products that are out there, but I just haven't seen a need for it. So I just haven't gone there. That's kind of a vague answer and maybe not even an answer at all, but I have very little experience with that type of stuff.
So I'd like to kind of round this chat out. I just want to ask you just a final question, and more so hinged on your YouTube channel. You do a really good job. You provide real solid content out there, very relatable. easy to get along with. Many people here would say you look exactly like Kenny Rogers.
I've heard
Kenny
that.
Rogers
I don't.
beekeeper.
I don't see it, but
You look like him and you sound like him. But could you just talk a little bit about why you started making YouTube channels and just kind of your motivation on doing what you're doing right now?
I know you're asking a question that you already know the answer to, but we're doing it for the camera, and that's okay. And half of that answer is you, and you know that. I'll tell this story. It's a fun story, I think. Some of you know who Kim Flottam is. He was the editor for Bee Culture magazine for a long time, and him and I are pretty good friends. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I spoke at a small symposium for people that were interested in becoming honey packers. And after it was all over, he was treating the speakers to dinner. And we were in a Chinese restaurant. Don't ask me why I remember that, but we were. And I was sitting directly across the table from him. And I was just being mildly critical. And I didn't mean it personal, and he didn't take it personal. I just told him that I thought his magazine could use more articles from people who knew what they were talking about, and more nuts and bolts type articles, and instead of beekeepers that had been to Africa and had bees for 1 year. And it was a great adventure, and that's wonderful, but I didn't learn anything. And he thought about that comment for a minute, and then he looked me right in the eye and leaned right across the table and said, well, the people that are doing it aren't telling us how they're doing it. And he was talking to me. I mean, there was no doubt about that. And went to the motel that evening and thought about it. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm what a hypocrite am I? You know, I'm telling him what he needs, but not doing anything about it. So I had a conversation with myself and agreed to do some articles for him, and I did, and they came out okay, but I'm not a writer, and it took me a long time. And then one of my employees one evening said that we were feeding and we were using buckets, and he said, you know, there's this guy up in Canada that does it like we do, and he's really good, and you really need to look at this. And so I did. I watched one of your older videos on, you know, one of those videos with a thumbnail where you had 200 buckets in a row there. I forget which video it is, and I looked at that and with very, very curious. And when it was all over, I had an aha moment. I thought, okay, I could do that. Writing maybe, but I think I could make a YouTube video. So I purchased a camera, looked at a bunch of YouTube tutorials on how to make YouTube videos and gave it a start. And in the beginning, it was really just a hobby. And for the first year, I got very few views. It didn't take off. And then suddenly it just started to accelerate. And I can't exactly explain it, but I guess you get this compounded effect of sorts. And then you mentioned my name in one of your videos. I could see the next day how my views jumped when you mentioned my name, and then came and did the same thing. And suddenly I was becoming part of that group, you know. And I'm absolutely, what I said a couple of weeks ago, it's true. I am absolutely shocked and astounded of what this channel is doing. I'm just watching the numbers click on views and subscribers, and I don't have anything near what you have going on, but for little old me, I'm in shock. And then of course, all the emails and the comments are coming in, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that in the future if it keeps accelerating at the rate it's going. And I don't do the videos like you. I mean, you put out so many videos. I often wonder how you do that. And I re-commented to a comment in one of your videos. Somebody asked about you working so hard and doing things, and I made the comment. You probably didn't see it because it was a comment to a comment. I said, yeah, I don't know if that man ever sleeps, you know. And it's trying, and I'm actually now taking it seriously. This trip to Florida is all about creating YouTube content. Somebody told me, and I'm trying not to get an ego about it. I think I'm doing okay. They said, Bob, you have become an influencer. And he said, people are looking at you and you better get it right because they're taking your word for gospel. And I see that now. So I try to be very careful about what I say or who I quote, and make sure I'm not making a mistake, because somebody's going to take that to the bank. And I got to be so careful not to make a mistake. I am not the final word on anything. Some people think I'm an outright expert. I don't look at myself like that. I don't think I am. but I try to, if I put out a YouTube video and I've got a lot of quotes and things in there, I'm studying up a little bit. Trust me, I'm getting all over YouTube and Google, and I'm trying to make sure I'm not saying something stupid. I do not consider myself the final word on anything, honestly.
One thing I find within our industry is I find the beekeeping industry in general is just starved of perspective. And we're looking for all these answers that we don't have. And we're looking at other people to provide those answers for us, and not necessarily looking to you providing me the answer, but just you providing some solid content and some smart information on how you manage those issues. And maybe me as a beekeeper can translate some of that back to where I am and just make me a better beekeeper, just to be able to, understand my hives a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I find the internet or YouTube is allowing us to reach all the way around the world within seconds every morning. And we have this huge world conversation going on at the same time. And there's a lot of garbage out there. There's no doubt about that. But when we can find people like you, where you're solid, you're experienced, and you have all this wealth of knowledge and very relatable, then that's the reason why guys like you are increasing popularity, is just because of that, all those aspects. So you're doing a really good job, and I just want to say that congrats on your YouTube channel, and make sure that if you go to all these conventions and speak, that you bring your wife with you and make sure they flip the bill.
Yes, I picked up on that. I heard you say that, and I've already put that out there for a few. And that's the other thing that's occurring because of YouTube. I am getting a serious amount of requests to go here and there, and I know you know what I'm talking about. And I turn many of them down. I have to be very careful not to get caught up in April and March, April and May. And I don't have near the requests that you do, but I'm getting more than I used to. That's for sure. Suddenly, it's not just local anymore. I'm going to Missouri and maybe even Manitoba next winter. You never know.
I was just going to mention that. Yeah, you're just kind of a primer for the beekeepers in Manitoba right now. We're going to invite you up at the end of February, this time next year, COVID, depending on what COVID does. But we're going to hopefully allow you to experience a true Manitoba winter.
Yeah, it'll bring back memories from the distant past. And I thought maybe you might be having me on tonight to make sure I wasn't full of BS or something.
No, that's all good. So I'd like to end this chat now. I appreciate the time you've provided us, Bob. We just talk for hours, like all beekeepers. You just keep talking about everything about this craft, and we just go on forever. So I think I'll end it here. Okay. And I'd like to hopefully provide that invite to you next year to come up to the Manitoba Beekeepers Association and speak to some of the practices that you employ within your operations, instead of just speaking around issues like we did here. I want you to come up and talk about your queen rearing and talk about your package management and nuking and all these things that you do down there that we want to hear more about. So with that, I'd like to again thank you, Bob, and I'll pass it back to you, Will, and let you finish off the meeting.
Thanks a lot, Bob, for your insight and your knowledge on a bunch of good topics. I'm sure a lot of us learned quite a bit, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of views from us, and we'll be watching your channel.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Ian, for setting this up. And I guess we'll see a bunch of you next weekend at the convention. Thanks for coming.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to log everybody out. Have a good night.